The only VPN to prove multiple times in court that they have no record of your internet activity is private internet access. Each time the judge said, show us the person's internet activity, and private internet access said, sorry, we don't have it. Their systems are also regularly audited by Deloitte to verify the no-log policy. And it's the only VPN with open source code, so the whole world can see that nothing is being logged. Private internet access is giving my audience 83% off, which is just $203 a month plus 4 extra months for free. Go to piavpn.com/DavidP. The link is down below. Welcome, everybody. We're going to start with a little something different today. Some of you may be acquainted with Jessica Tarlov. Jessica Tarlov is often the lone left-wing voice on Fox News' The Five, sometimes on other Fox News shows. And what we're going to look at today really serves dual purposes. On the one hand, I'm going to play some clips for you of Jessica Tarlov just taking down some of the recent attacks against Kamala Harris's vice presidential selection, Tim Walz, and they are relevant because it's important for us to know and understand what are the attacks, what's the truth of the matter, and how should we be equipped to respond. But if we zoom out a little bit, this is useful not only when thinking about Tim Walz and Kamala Harris in this particular campaign, but it's also useful because Jessica Tarlov brilliantly, time and again, and we've looked at her appearances before, shows how you take on 4 of these non-thinking Magapotamians at one time. So, online I saw people saying, wow, she took down the troglodytes. That seems a little bit charged for me. It's a little too ad hominem-y, but certainly Magapotamians is a term that I'm comfortable with their antiquated and retrograde beliefs. So the first topic that Jessica takes on here is that one of the new attacks on Tim Walz is, okay, even though he served in the military, he chickened out of going to Iraq, or he didn't serve in the right way. And, this is compared to Cadet Bone Spurs, Donald Trump, who got a letter from his private doctor saying his ankles hurt. Don't send him to the war. So let's look at clip number 1. And Jessica's just very good at this.
Ask me, I'm telling you.
Said that people who had gotten captured, the suckers and losers, doesn't want to go and be seen next to people.
That.
Oh, he's denied everything. He denied he slept with Stormy Daniels,
people.
but that obviously hasn't worked out for him.
Okay, so first and foremost, Jessica Tarlov is going right at the comparison. Hey, listen, Tim Walz actually served. On the other hand, Trump called people who serve suckers and losers. Oh, well, he denied that. He also still denies having had an affair with Stormy Daniels, and every single one of us knows that that's true. This continues and presses forward. And Jessica Tarlov points out, this is not a good tit for tat or point by point for J.D. Vance to be attacking Tim Walz on.
I don't think that you should ever say that anyone who served didn't do a good job in this. If J.D. Vance wants to get into that tit for tat, he was in the public affairs department. It's just a fact of all of this. I don't think he should be going there with Tim Walz. I think that everyone who has served...
He was in a war zone. He was in Iraq.
Walking around with a...
He was in Iraq.
Oh, he was a reporter.
He was in Iraq, okay?
Okay.
He was in the Marines.
Okay.
And this guy
I get it. He's
left
a big man.
his
J.D.
unit.
Vance...
His units... Listen, it doesn't matter what I think. His
it
unit
does matter.
thinks he's a coward. His
that's
unit
not true.
thinks
And
he's
this
a
has
coward.
come up...
Now we're going to, you might be saying, what the hell is Jesse Waters talking about? We're going to dig into this more deeply in our deep dive later in the show today about Tim Walz. But the point that Jessica Tarlov is making is a good one, which is this is a bad game to play, and also it's hypocritical. We used to always hear from Republicans, you never, ever, ever criticize anyone's service and you support the troops and all this. And of course, Trump changed that. Trump changed that when he said about the late Senator John McCain, former prisoner of war, I prefer my war heroes who aren't captured. And that opened the floodgates to the principle of you don't criticize people who serve only when it's politically convenient. And Jessica Tarlov makes a good point, which is for all of his bragging about being in the Marines, J.D. Vance was in the public affairs department. And she's even saying, I don't think this is a good road to go down regardless. And then Jesse Waters gets into the tit for tat. The whole point here is, if the principle is we don't denigrate the service of people who served, then why are they doing it with Tim Walz? And then one more segment on this. And again, Janine Pirro here tries pointing out that Tim Walz strategically timed leaving the military to avoid service. Okay, let's take a listen.
I'm going to go stolen valor first.
Yes.
So obviously this was going to come up because the Trump campaign manager was the one behind the John Kerry Swift boat attack, which was obviously very persuasive to people. He served for 24 years honorably. Then he stopped to run for Congress on a platform of ending the war. And I don't think that anyone, especially with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, did he dodge the draft 4 or 5 times? Bone spurs, Captain Bone Spurs? What say you, Judge?
Bone spurs are a very serious issue, Jessica.
I can tell by the way you said that you know that it is not serious.
All right, so you get the point here. This is not, when you are dealing with people whose North Star is not the truth and reality, but is simply, what can I come up with in a brazenly and nakedly political way to attack the people I've already decided I don't like and aren't worthy people? What can I come up with? And Jessica Tarlov does a really good job here of pointing out, you're wrong on the facts. What you're doing is wrong morally and ethically. And it also violates the very principles you've outlined about not denigrating people's service. She's really good at this. But if we step back for a second, there's actually a bigger story here about Tim Walz, which is some of the criticisms that they're levying against him now are obviously fabricated because we have audio of Trump saying he was doing a good job. Let's talk about that next. An attack line, attack Tim Walz. One of the attack lines is, he let Minneapolis burned to the ground. He handled the George Floyd protests terribly. He incited or allowed or permitted violence and looting and burning and arson. There's a little problem with this, though, which is that we now have audio of failed former President Donald Trump praising Tim Walz, saying he's very happy with how Tim Walz handled the George Floyd protests. This is so critical because anytime now they come up with this, he let crime run rampant in Minneapolis. Trump said he did a good job. Trump himself said, I'm happy with how he did it. The audio isn't perfect here, but you can hear what's being said. Here's Trump confirming Tim Walz did a good job managing the George Floyd protest.
I know Governor Walz is on the phone and we spoke, and I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. I asked him to do that. And
I totally agree with how he handled it. I asked him to do it.
The world was laughing. 3 days later, I spoke to the governor. The governor's, I think, on the call, and he's an excellent guy. You've got an
excellent guy.
Big National Guard out there that's ready to come in and fight like hell. I tell you, the best, what they did in Minneapolis was incredible. They went in and dominated.
Listen to this. Now, whether you like the idea of police dominating protesters, that's a different question. But the point here is Trump is acknowledging Tim Walz did a good job. The police did a good job by his standards. And yet now, one of the talking points they've come up with, because they don't really have anything to criticize Tim Walz with, one of the talking points they've come up with is, he did a terrible job handling the George Floyd protest in Minneapolis. Whatever your belief is about how it was handled and how it should have been handled, Trump said it was done perfectly.
And it happened immediately. Tim is on the phone now, Tim Walz. Again, I was very happy with the last couple of days, Tim. You called up big numbers, and the big numbers knocked them out so fast it was like bowling pins.
Our city is grieving and in pain. And I would just say, as far as the potential, the peaceful protesters who are expressing an outrage that is real, they witnessed 8 minutes of a man dying in front of them. Well, at that point in time, I did something unprecedented. I mobilized the entire Minnesota National Guard, and that's what the president was alluding to with the size of the force was capable. But I think, again, Mr. President, you asked on explaining this, I would just say, So it's going to be very difficult. There are bad actors in this, but there is such a legitimate anger. Our real dilemma.
So look at that. Look at that on this phone call. And by the way, the fact that these phone calls always happen with speakerphone, everyone's on speakerphone, there's reverberation, there's echo. If everybody could just put on a proper headset mic for these phone calls, we would have such better audio recordings, but that's a story for a different day. Tim Walz both being praised by Trump for his handling and also saying, by the way, the protesters have reason to be upset. The protesters are grieving what happened to George Floyd at the hands of police. And also, I am handling it in the best way I can and keeping Minneapolis safe and intact, and Trump praising him for it. So you have to understand, with all of these attacks, it's because they have nothing. And we'll get to this later, but Tim Walz bailed on military service because he knew he was going to get deployed to Iraq. People who served with Tim Walz said, we didn't know we were getting deployed months later, that our unit would be deployed. There were rumors, as there always are, but that's it. That one's not true. Tim Walz allowed Minneapolis to burn to the ground. He did a terrible job. We have audio of Trump saying, you did a great job and you did exactly what I wanted you to do. The reason this is happening is the criticisms don't actually align with reality, and they don't have substance with which to attack Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick, which is a sign that he's a pretty good pick. Item number 3 is the DUI arrest from 1995. And we're going to get to all of that. But remember this audio every time they go with, he did a terrible job with the protests. Trump certainly seemed to think he did a good job. Now, let me prepare you for their defense, because you know how it always works. We find something that seems irrefutable. This is game over, right? They bring up the protests and we go, Trump said he did a good job. Here is how they are going to rebut this. They will say, the date of that phone call that I just played for you was before Tim Walz let Minneapolis get out of control and burn to the ground. That's how they're going to get out of it. They always have a way to get out of it. And it's going to be by saying Tim Walz may well have been doing a good job up until the date of this call, but then he was no longer doing a good job. Of course, then now we're in the weeds and we rebut it by saying the reaction in Minneapolis to the protests did not change before and after this phone call. But by this point, you've lost them, right? The point is, be prepared for them to back up to that, to say Trump was right as of that date, but then it went downhill. It just happens not to be the truth. Let me know your thoughts about the attack lines we are seeing on Tim Walz. And by the way, for someone in Trump and MAGA who believe that your vice presidential pick doesn't make a difference, they're expending a lot of effort, energy, and resources in attacking Tim Walz. So they must suspect that he does help Kamala Harris. Let me know your thoughts. info@davidpakman.com. Did you know there is only one VPN fully optimized for streaming 4K video and downloading large files? That's our sponsor, Private Internet Access. A VPN hides your IP address, allows you to make it look like your device is anywhere in the world. So this lets you stream content on Netflix and Hulu and HBO Max, not normally available in your home country. For instance, the show Friends is not available on Netflix in the US, but when I change my IP address to the UK, I can watch Friends on Netflix and a ton of other awesome content I would otherwise miss out on without lag and without buffering. Private internet access is also faster than other VPNs for file sharing, so you can download anonymously, but without the long wait times. Anyone can use private internet access. Just turn it on once and forget about it. No special knowledge required. And you can use it on all of your devices, TV, phone, tablet, computer. Private internet access is giving my audience 83% off, which comes out to just $203 a month, plus 4 extra months for free. Go to piavpn.com/DavidP. The link is in the description. Lest anyone forget, we do have a program that depends on your support to exist. The primary means of support is through the membership program at joinpakman.com. Check it out. We have too much to discuss today for me to spend more time talking about it, but joinpakman.com is the place to do it. We got our first instance yesterday of a presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris getting interrupted by a heckler and shutting it down absolutely perfectly. Now, I'm going to be very upfront with everybody. This was a heckler nominally from the left, a sort of free Palestine, Gaza type heckler who chose to go to the Kamala Harris rally and try to interrupt her speech. Let's take a look at how Kamala Harris handles it here.
He intends to surrender our fight against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
So listen, we're 90 days away, 90 something days away from a critical inflection point here in the United States. And I would argue it will have cascading effects around the world. Why are you doing this at the Kamala Harris rally? They never protest the Trump rallies with this stuff. Trump would allow Gaza to be destroyed flat out. And this is why it gets disappointing to me. Because we end up with, fortunately, I'm not seeing that much of it this time. 6 months ago, there was more. But you even see some progressive commentators, people in my position, kind of virtue signaling around how great it is that the protesters are taking it right to Kamala and this sort of thing. I really care about the effect that this election is going to have on people all over the world and in the United States. And Kamala Harris is the better candidate on every issue compared to Trump, including on Israel, Gaza, including on what would be best for the Palestinian people, period. If you can't see that now, we're talking about weeks before the election. It's not even really 3 months because we're already almost halfway through August. We're talking about 2+ months. It is legitimate to ask these protesters, what do you actually want? What are you actually trying to do? Because if Trump wins, Gaza becomes a parking lot. And then what are you going to be like? Hey, listen, I protested Kamala. I did it for the people of Gaza, and Trump won, and now Gaza's a parking lot. So if you claim to be a progressive, and if you really want to demonstrate that you're as progressive as you claim to be, and you go and you say, well, I'm going to protest Kamala Harris here because of her position on Israel, Gaza, or for whatever you perceive to be the faults of the Biden-Harris administration in terms of the circumstances there, even though the situation has a 70-year history. I would argue you don't know how foreign policy works and that you are ultimately doing the bidding of the guy who would be the absolute worst for the Palestinian people, the malignant, narcissist, egomaniac Donald Trump. Now, let me play a little more of this. Here's a little more context around this interruption.
And please do check out Project 2025. Because I'm telling you, it is a plan. It is a plan to weaken America's middle class. Project 2025.
Now, what's going on here is that the protester continues to try to interrupt you.
If he is elected, it's all good. It's all good. I'm here because we believe in democracy. Everyone's voice matters, but I am speaking now. I am speaking now.
So I think you get the gist of this. Let's not sabotage ourselves or even sabotage. Kamala Harris met with the co-founder of this Michigan uncommitted voter movement before this event. She's doing all of the right things. She's better on this issue than Trump by a lot. And meanwhile, it's interesting to see that the right is saying Kamala Harris is actually anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish because she didn't select Josh Shapiro to be her running mate. So, folks, let's win this one. We have the opportunity, we have the possibility for a landslide victory that will reject the autocracy of Donald Trump. Let's not screw it up. That's my request. Tim Walz showed the decency and empathy that Trump and Vance could never be even capable of showing during a medical emergency yesterday in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This is such a small thing, but it's a reminder about how fundamentally different as people Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are compared to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Tim Walz paused his speech to help people in the audience who need water, which is quite a contrast to when Trump encourages violence against people in the audience if they yell out a protest, for example. A small thing, but so emblematic of the difference between the two tickets here.
Oh, can we get somebody to help? Somebody's hot. Somebody's hot. Can we get somebody to help? You okay? Drink some water, folks. It is hot out. Get somebody else. Thank you. We get water?
They're so weird. They're so weird. They're so weird.
You okay? Yeah. Thank you all for helping.
This is how someone behaves when they genuinely care about the people in the audience as people. And listen, if Harris Walz become president and vice president, we'll have policy disagreements. We'll have things we like and we'll have things we don't like. But the contrast as a person, remember Donald Trump going to Puerto Rico after a hurricane and shooting paper towels like a game, like free throws, like basketball free throws into the crowd. This is very, very different. Here's just a little bit more of this.
Yay. Thank you all. They do. Thank you all. We're okay. We have someone down. They're treating him. They're getting him some water, and it's good.
All right, so you get it. Now let's get to a little bit of the substance from this very interesting rally. I want to give you an example of the repetition that Brian Tyler Cohen and I spoke about yesterday, and how we actually should want Harris and Walz to be sticking to the messaging that works, because Republicans know to be repeating the same things to get people to kind of internalize the messaging. And Tim Walz doing it and doing it really well yesterday.
We don't shy away from challenges, but I'll tell you what, Donald Trump, he sees the world differently than we see it. He has no understanding of service because he's too busy servicing himself. Again and again and again. Again and again and again. This guy weakens our country to strengthen his own hands. He mocks our laws. He sows chaos and division amongst the people. And that's to say nothing of the job he did as president. He froze in the face of COVID, and it cost people's lives. He drove the economy into the ground. And make no mistake about it, violent crime was up when Donald Trump was president. Those of you who are a little older know this. Older Republicans used to talk about freedom. These guys today, it turns out that freedom to them means government should be free to invade your exam room with your doctor.
So you'll recognize this material from previous rallies. I think it's good that he's going with this. This is a really good attack line against Republicans. They claim to be about freedom, but really it's the freedom to choose the same things they would choose and otherwise no. And then lastly, a really great moment where Vice President Kamala Harris, when the crowd starts chanting "lock 'em up" about Trump, she actually says, hold on. We have a legal system that will handle that. That's not what we chant. And this is just the cherry on top of what it really means to be for law and order.
I know Donald Trump's tight. I know it's tight. In fact, I've been dealing with people like him my whole career. For example, as Attorney General of California, well, hold on. You know what? The courts are going to handle that part of it. What we're going to do is beat them in November.
That's exactly right. That is law and order, okay? Not lock up Hillary, lock up Biden, lock up my political opponents. It's, hey, you know what? We have a system to adjudicate these circumstances. We're going to run an election here this year. And just absolutely perfect. The crowd gets it. That's law and order. Trump is an unwell man because of how terribly this is going for him. New mental health scare about Donald Trump as his brain seems to be cracking once again. He is down in the polls. He is holed up at Mar-a-Lago with a single campaign event this week in a period where Harris Walz have 7, maybe 8 campaign events, and Trump just losing his mind, posting to Truth Social.
Truth Central.
Quote, Kamala refuses to do interviews because her team realizes she is unable to answer questions, much like Biden was not able to answer questions, but for different reasons. He is just plain shot, and she is just plain incompetent. Her policies of open borders, no fracking or drilling for oil in any way, shape, or form, transgender anything, anti-Israel, but gross incompetence towards getting anything done for the Palestinians, no clue on inflation or the economy, unlimited money to fight foreign wars, and so much more are catastrophic. If she is elected, our county, I guess he means country, but maybe it'll only affect one county. Our county, and indeed the world, will suffer a 1929-style Great Depression. It will be the worst in history, and America will be destroyed. Saying that you're worried about democracy if Trump wins, they claim, is an incitement to violence against Trump. And meanwhile, Trump says America will be destroyed if Kamala Harris becomes president. Smells like a double standard. Trump continuing with this brain crack, saying, quote, I will expose Kamala during the debate the same way I expose Crooked Joe, Hillary, and everyone else during debates, only I think Kamala will be easier. Trump continuing, we are living in a pro-criminal atmosphere. It will end on November 5th. And Trump continuing, crazy Kamala cast the tie-breaking vote on massive spending bills that caused the inflation crisis. We know from polling that Americans are increasingly questioning the fitness of Trump to run for president. We know from public opinion that there are growing concerns that Trump may not even be able to be fit to campaign, never mind to be president. And he's holed up, sending out screed after screed, and it makes sense that his mental health and physical health are being questioned because this guy is very much unwell, and it's happening every single day. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com, joinpakman.com. All right, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, is the man that Kamala Harris has chosen as her running mate. We are going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into who he is, what he brings to the table, and importantly, the lines of attack that Republicans have been using against him and that they might use against him. Now, maybe the biggest asset that Walz brings to the table is that he's just a relatable, normal guy with an interesting backstory for a politician. He has charisma, which J.D. Vance doesn't. He seems to have a moral and ethical compass, which J.D. Vance doesn't. He seems to have a history of consistency with regard to how he applies his values to politics. And his background from an employment perspective is also really interesting. He worked as a high school geography teacher and football coach, and he also achieved the rank of Command Sergeant Major in the Army National Guard with 24 years of service, something that we hear from the right is to be lauded and applauded and valued. His two children were conceived through IVF, which inspired the name of their daughter, Hope, and IVF takes a sort of interesting place in this entire discussion because in the aftermath of overturning Roe v. Wade, thanks to the 3 Supreme Court justices nominated by Donald Trump, the next sort of battle line has been drawn around IVF in the political discourse, as well as with surrogacy, because Republicans are indeed moving on to try to roll back other reproductive rights. Michael Knowles, the vile guy from the Daily Wire, who I used to debate with until I would get too many death threats every time I appeared on his show, so I stopped doing it. Michael Knowles has come out recently against IVF and against surrogacy, or at least against it in many cases, saying elements of it are evil. In terms of his career, I guess we would say, or background as an elected official, Walz was elected to Congress in 2006 in an upset and held the largely rural district an additional 5 times. And so this is a sign of his sort of crossover appeal, maybe not to the most conservative voters, but certainly to rural voters who lean conservative in other political contexts. And when he was in Congress, he really did develop a reputation for being bipartisan, for co-sponsoring legislation with Republicans, and for getting things done. Now, he left the House in 2019 to run for governor of Minnesota and won by over 11 points. And his record as governor is impressive, to say the least. Passed a universal school meals program, which in another world, we wouldn't even say, wow, what an accomplishment. But especially in the aftermath of COVID, many Republicans have loudly said, stop the free school lunches for kids. Okay, as Governor Tim Walz passed a universal school meals program, oversaw the legalization of recreational cannabis, expanded voting rights, protected access to gender-affirming care, signed into law paid family leave. And on a sort of more personal level, Tim Walz has a number of characteristics that make him appealing. He's obviously appealing to us, right? But we are often written off as progressive coastal elites or whatever. He also has appeal to middle America. He's an enthusiastic hunter. He likes working on cars. He likes farming-related activities. He's also just down to earth and likable. And that apparently was a crucial aspect to Kamala Harris's decision to ultimately select Tim Walz over the other people that were being considered. Another, I guess, important element in terms of the context of this race, because it's such a race about rhetoric and framing and messaging, is that Walz recently coined this attack line that has gone viral against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and some other Republicans, that these guys are weird. They're just weird and they're creepy. And it's caught on like wildfire because it's, number one, really simple, and the left does not always have a penchant for simple messaging, but also because it's true. These are really weird, creepy people. They want to be in medical exam rooms with you. They want to be in classrooms with your kids. They want to be at home interfering with how you raise your kids. So there are a lot of different aspects, the legislative history, the personal charisma, the ability to speak in sort of pithy and useful terms about what the right is doing, many things about Tim Walz that make him a really good vice presidential pick. Now, as far as balancing the ticket and identity, we talked about this on the award-winning and world-famous bonus show yesterday to some degree. You may have noticed that Kamala Harris is a woman of color from California. And it's clear that the campaign wanted to go with a white-presenting man. And we often talk about both sides attacking the other side's use of identity and so on and so forth. And there's been a lot made of the fact that identity is at play here. And that's not, we talk about when identity politics goes wrong and when it's used as in the wrong way or to silence people or whatever. There was obviously an identity conversation where, as Kamala Harris and her team sat down to say, all right, who are we considering? Obviously, there was a decision made that they're not going with another woman. And it was, I'm sure, a calculated decision. Hey, you know what? There's probably more to gain here by choosing a man rather than a woman and not having two women on the ticket. For a whole bunch of different reasons, it probably helps us in the net that the vice president be a man. And it would be great to live in a world where these things didn't have to be considerations. And to some degree, we live in more of a world like that than we used to. But there are definitely people on the margins who might be less likely, who would be less likely to support a ticket with two women or two people of color. And this is probably why we saw the final handful or so candidates being white passing or white presenting men. Now, why do I say that instead of just saying white? Many of you, I'm sure, know why I'm saying that. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, reportedly the final candidate alongside Tim Walz, is Jewish. And Judaism is a religion. It's also an ethnicity. This is the reason why sometimes in fertility treatments, you have what's called an Ashkenazi carrier panel done. There is something there that is beyond just your beliefs religiously. And white supremacists will be very quick to tell you that Jews are not white. But I use the term white presenting because Josh Shapiro certainly in social terms would be part of the group of white guys that's being considered. So Walz, certainly a white guy, a little bit, he's got the male pattern baldness and he's the whole package of your sort of generic middle-aged white guy, but he's also Midwestern. And while the conventional wisdom is you don't pick a VP to help you win any particular state, certainly didn't work. There are times where this has not worked historically, looking at elections. When you have such a focus on Wisconsin, Michigan, maybe even Pennsylvania as important states of focus, it certainly won't hurt, is my instinct, to have Tim Walz from the Midwest. Now, the other aspect about Walz that is important to consider is that he contrasts really well with J.D. Vance. Walz is the Midwestern, blue-collar, car-loving, meat and potatoes, farm-loving American that J.D. Vance tries to pretend to be and doesn't do a good job of pretending and doesn't do a good job of trying either. And that's a really interesting thing. Now, let's talk about maybe what we might call the downsides to Tim Walz or the likely attack lines or liabilities. To those who want a VP pick who can deliver a state, if you believe that they can, which I think is questionable, Minnesota was going blue anyway. Joe Biden's lead in Minnesota was significant. Kamala Harris's lead in Minnesota is significant. And so that is not an obvious advantage to Tim Walz, which is his home state is one that Kamala Harris is going to win. And also, if in whatever circumstances present themselves, Kamala Harris doesn't win Minnesota, Democrats are losing in a landslide anyway. So you could say it might have been smarter to go with Josh Shapiro, who maybe could help deliver Pennsylvania, or Mark Kelly, who could help deliver Arizona. But the counterpoint is this is not really the reason or how you evaluate choosing a vice president. And that's really the counter. There is not conclusive evidence that your VP can deliver their home state. The next attack line is going to be about the 1995 DUI arrest that Tim Walz had. He was arrested for drunk driving in 95. This led him to stop drinking alcohol. I don't know if Republicans are going to focus on that. I saw rumblings of going after him, not for the DUI and the arrest per se, because Trump's been convicted on 34 felony counts. I don't know that that's the door they want to open, but it looked like they were kind of floating the idea of he was dishonest about the DUI. I don't know that they're really going to go with that line. More over the last 48 hours, we are hearing Republicans criticize Tim Walz's departure from the military in 2005. He departed his unit, National Guard unit, shortly before it was deployed to Iraq, and he did so to run for Congress. And despite the track record of service, 24 years, there are people on the right arguing that he abandoned his fellow troops right when they needed him the most, and that they all knew they were about to get deployed to Iraq, and he was chicken and he was scared. And some are even going as far as to saying that this is stolen valor, which is he bailed to avoid going to Iraq, but still presents himself as brave or whatever, deserving credit for his service. The truth of this attack is that Walz retired in May of 2005, and the alert for mobilization came months later. The official mobilization didn't happen until October. And what individuals who served with Tim Walz have said is there were, of course, rumors we were going to be mobilized, as there were rumors in just about every unit at the time, but we didn't know. It was just rumor, and that is it. So he didn't bail once he knew they were going to Iraq. Those orders came later. And he also, by the way, used his position as a member of Congress to try to end the war and bring troops home. It also may not be wise for Republicans to open up this line of attack, because Walz served in the military 24 years. Trump dodged the draft multiple times with these notes about bone spurs in his feet. So it doesn't seem super smart. Next line of attack is that Walz was governor during the George Floyd murder and subsequent protests. And there are attacks coming against him that he didn't act quickly enough to stop looting and arson, that he allowed the city to be overrun, he allowed the city to be destroyed. The reality, of course, is that this was years ago at this point. I don't know that it's an attack that's going to land. It's feeling a little bit dated. And very importantly, the audio we played at the top of the show reveals that at the time, Trump called Walz and said, "You're doing a great job. You're doing exactly what I asked you to do. You are managing this in exactly the way I wanted you to do it." So this nullifies a lot of that criticism. Now we get to sort of like the most generic attack line against Tim Walz. He's too liberal. He signed in far left laws as governor, like universal school meals or paid family leave. But those are really popular policies, including among Republicans in Minnesota. So I think that that's liable to backfire as well. So it's been days now since Tim Walz was selected. Republicans so far haven't found anything super effective, and he's been really well received, which is very different than the case with J.D. Vance, who keeps having to answer for bizarre statements he's made about cat ladies. And there's a bunch of discussion now as to whether he's wearing ladies' makeup and his backstory romantically with couches and all of these things. So was Walz a strong pick? 100%. Was he the best pick? That's really hard to say until you look back in the rearview mirror. You can make a strong case for Josh Shapiro. You can make a strong case for Mark Kelly, although I think Mark Kelly in adversarial situations is a little bit less strong. But if anything, this is indicative of the deep Democratic bench that we have right now, and the fact that the left is relatively well set up for the future. I don't think that it's a sign that it was a mistake to pick Walz, that there were other good options. It's a sign that there's a deep bench here. So bottom line, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are an excellent team. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, are they weird? Yes. Are they creepy? Yes, of course. But Trump's increasing brain collapse combined with J.D. Vance's total lack of charisma and ability to answer any question in a straightforward way is making this increasingly a matchup that on the personality side favors Harris Walz. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts about the pick. info@davidpakman.com. And make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show. If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Let's pick up the campaign trail with J.D. Vance, also known as Shady Vance or JV Vance, like he's the junior varsity version of a real running mate at the end of the day. He had a couple of very interesting events, and what really stands out to me is that on a personality level, like J.D. Vance and I are the same age, plus or minus a few months, I think. And I just try to think, I know a lot of different people I grew up with, high school, etc. We're all basically this exact same age right now. The only, how can I even say this? The only people I know personally who are this uncharismatic seeming, man, it's just so hard to say this without sounding so offensive. There's like some explanation that sometimes is medical in nature. It just sounds so horrible to say. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a personality that he seems to have that is really an edge case. It's a fringe personality of some way to be this unappealing as a person, some traits of which sometimes connect to medical explanations. I don't believe they do with JD Vance. I think he's just really a horrible person is what I'm trying to say. I hope I'm being kind of like sensitive and not offending anybody. He was asked in Shelby Township, Michigan, how exactly can you fake your race? As Trump said that Kamala Harris, she used to be Indian and then she became black or whatever. And his answer is it's just like nothing. There's no substance here.
Donald Trump said something very simple, totally inoffensive, but frankly, obviously true to me, which is that Kamala Harris is a chameleon. She's a fake, and the American people have to look at her record if we actually want to know how she stands on the issues, because her words simply can't be trusted. Sir.
How can you fake your race? If
I'm sorry?
you're both Indian and black, how can she fake her race?
She fakes who she is depending on the audience that she's in front of, and that's who she is, and that's who she's always been.
The weird thing about this is, by my count, JD Vance has had 3 or 4 names. And I know that you're probably saying, David, what are you talking about? He's had multiple names, and even like look up how he ended up being called JD Vance. Like start there and then see if he's the guy to be criticizing Kamala Harris for crafting some kind of a public persona. And by the way, one other really funny thing, extraordinarily funny thing, there were other Republicans who said, Nikki Haley hides who she is. She hides her ethnic origins, her national origins, because her real name is Nimrata, and she goes by Nikki because it sounds white and all. And on the other hand, you have Kamala Harris, who's just like, I'm Kamala. She's not going by Cammy. She's not going by Kimmy or Kim. And they're like, oh, she's hiding. She's a chameleon. She's not showing us who she really is. We see what she looks like, and her name's Kamala, and yet we're supposed to believe she's the one who's being dishonest about her identity. Now, here's another really interesting, and again, every one of these questions, the answers are just disaster. Reporter asks JD, you've suggested Josh Shapiro wasn't picked because he's Jewish. Do you have any evidence to support that? I don't think you'll be shocked by JD's answer.
From NBC News, you have repeatedly suggested that the only reason Kamala Harris didn't pick Josh Shapiro to be her running mate is because of his Jewish faith. Do you have any evidence to support that assertion that a person who's married to a Jewish man is somehow anti-Semitic or bowing to anti-Semites?
Well, I reject the premise of the question. I did not say that was the only reason that Kamala Harris didn't choose Josh Shapiro. So you should, take a little less DNC talking points when you ask your questions and ask a real question.
So, of course, what JD Vance does is he says, you are fake news because I didn't say it was the only reason. But the question still remains, fine. Do you have any evidence to support that one of many reasons why you claim Josh Shapiro wasn't picked? And of course, he doesn't. You might recall that at the abortive NABJ interview where Donald Trump claimed Kamala Harris became black, he was also asked a very straightforward question. Is JD Vance ready to be president on day one if something were to happen to you? And Trump responded by saying vice presidents don't matter. Not exactly a ringing endorsement of his running mate. JD Vance was asked, did you like that answer?
Detroit Free Press.
Thank you.
When Trump was at the NABJ conference, he was asked whether you'd be ready to assume the presidency on day one. And he responded by talking about how the vice president pick doesn't really impact the election outcome.
Sure.
Was that the response that you were hoping for from the former president?
Well, what the president has said, and I agree with him, is that most people are voting at the top of the ticket. Now, Tim.
All right. Hey, How did you feel when Trump said you don't matter? He goes, well, he was basically right. I essentially don't matter. People are just voting for president. And then finally, these are just sometimes beyond belief. Trump, who notably has no sense of humor. J.D. Vance says Trump has the best sense of humor of anyone he has ever met.
And so, look, I think my message to the American people is very simple on this, that President Trump in particular has the best sense of humor of anybody I've ever seen in American politics. He loves to joke. He loves to tell, he loves to make fun of everybody that's out there.
We know Trump likes to make fun of people, but it's malicious and it's nasty. I have never seen evidence that Trump has a sense of humor. I've never seen Trump understand a single joke or satire in a real, deep, substantive way. And everything about what J.D. Vance said here in Shelby Township completely and totally backwards. Now, if you think he was uncharismatic here, just wait until I show you this next clip. Why would someone want to sit down and have a beer with you, J.D.? This is the question that J.D. Vance was asked at an event yesterday. It's a really simple question. It's kind of alluding or hearkening back to this idea of who would you rather sit down and have a beer with, which is this kind of folk litmus test for personality and charisma and gravitas in American politics. It's a really easy question. And J.D. Vance answers it by saying, I drink too much. This guy is this is the worst vice presidential selection, certainly of my lifetime. Certainly of my lifetime. Let's listen to this.
Why would people in Wisconsin want to have a beer with you?
Well, I guess they'd want to have a beer with me because I actually do like to drink beer, and I probably like to drink beer a little bit too much, but that's okay. I'm sure the media won't give me too much crap over that. But look, I mean, the reason I'm doing this, and the reason I think Donald Trump is doing this, and I think the media often slanders him, but I've never met a guy who likes normal people more than Donald Trump.
Why would someone want to sit down and have a beer with you? Well, because I like beer and I drink too much, but Trump's great. What? It is hard to think of a less charismatic person and a worse answer. If I'm going to go off the top of my head. Hey, David, now that you're running for whatever, why would someone want to sit and have a beer with you? And, they're in Wisconsin. Well, I'm a good guy to have a beer with in general. And especially in Wisconsin, because I really value hearing from people who work in the industries represented here. It's manufacturing, it's agriculture, it's cheddar cheese or whatever. And I love learning about that stuff. And I would love to talk with Wisconsinites about their work and what they like. Almost any answer would have been better than I'm a good guy to have a beer with, I guess, because I like beer and I drink too much. But Trump gets slandered by the media. What? Did you hear the question? So the contrast, if you look at Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, could not be more clear. And in a way, the contrast is kind of bigger because of the generational divide. Tim Walz being about 60 and J.D. Vance being about 40 makes the contrast particularly more stark because one might expect in the way that Kamala Harris being 20 years younger than Trump translates to her being more energetic and didactic and erudite on the campaign trail. You might assume that the 20-year younger J.D. Vance relative to Tim Walz would also exhibit the same thing, but he doesn't. It's Tim Walz who has the energy. It's Tim Walz who has the ability to connect with the crowd. And it's Tim Walz who has the ability or willingness to answer a simple question. And you know who's noticing? Independent voters. Take a look at these forthcoming numbers. We have a stunning new poll. Kamala Harris is leading Donald Trump by 9 points among independent voters. These are blockbuster numbers. And of course, the question is, what is the implication for the November election? Marist has a new poll out. In the general poll, it is Harris 51, Trump 48, with 2% undecided. That's plus three for Kamala Harris. Already a great position to be in, given that you've just entered this race a couple of weeks ago. But take a look at one of these underlying numbers. Among independent voters, Harris receives 53% of the vote to 44% for Donald Trump, with 3% of independents undecided. Now, 9 is a big number and a natural question. And I know because my audience is extraordinarily smart, let me put it that way. I know you're asking yourselves, okay, Kamala's +9 among independents right now. Where were independents in 2020? And that's an absolutely perfect question. And let me actually find that number. Hold on, I have it somewhere here. Here we go. If you look back at the exit polling from 2020, this is kind of hard to see and I apologize. You find that among independent voters, it was Biden 52, Trump 43. In 2020, Biden won independent voters by 9, the exact same margin, albeit with a 1-point differential, that Kamala Harris is leading Trump among independents right now. So there's 2 ways to interpret this. One way to interpret it is, well, with that same margin, independents kind of become zeroed out. And what matters is turnout from the base. That's one interpretation. I don't think that's really the right interpretation right now. I think a better interpretation is she's already leading by 9 and she only just became a candidate. Biden won by 9 after months of it being known that it's Biden versus Trump. The fact that Kamala Harris is already +9, to me, suggests at the end of the day, she has the potential to win independents by 10 or even 11. And of course, we all know how 2020 turned out. Biden won electorally by a healthy margin, although the electoral victory hinged on only about 120,000 votes in 3 states. If Kamala Harris can win independents by 10 or 11 rather than 9, then it certainly suggests that you would have a larger margin of victory compared to 2020. That's only if we vote. Importantly, there's no guarantee here. This is if we make it happen. The polls are reflective of an opportunity. And the polls are increasingly looking less and less good for Donald Trump. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to show you. And let me just pull it up here because this is also every single day. This is shifting. Kamala Harris now in an average of national polls is leading by 0.5 point. Now, 0.5 point. OK, but David, that's very little. That's right. It's very little, but it's a 4-point swing from when Joe Biden exited the race. So that is all looking good. And the way we interpret this is we behave as if the election might hinge on our vote alone, meaning we don't stay home. Obviously, I'm not going to be staying home in November, but we also analyze the race and recognize that the polling and the rally attendance and the political donations signal significant enthusiasm behind Harris and Walz right now. Trump knows it. MAGA knows it. That's why he's completely off the rails lately. We have a great bonus show for you today. We are going to talk about Nancy Pelosi's recent comments that some Republicans told her Democrats have to beat Trump in November. Nancy Pelosi is saying Republicans are scared of a Trump victory, but they won't say it publicly. Number 2, a county in New York has banned wearing masks to protect or hide the identity of the Gaza war protesters. First Amendment issue, medical issue, overreach, or law and order. We will discuss it. And number 3, the family of the explorer who died in that submersible submarine, I guess we would call it, has sued OceanGate for more than $50 million. Do they have a case? All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Sign up at joinpacman.com. Coupon code SaveDemocracy24. I'll see you then or back tomorrow on the Friday show. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. The only VPN to prove multiple times in court that they have no record of your internet activity is private internet access. Each time the judge said, show us the person's internet activity, and private internet access said, sorry, we don't have it. Their systems are also regularly audited by Deloitte to verify the no-log policy. And it's the only VPN with open source code, so the whole world can see that nothing is being logged. Private internet access is giving my audience 83% off, which is just $203 a month plus 4 extra months for free. go to piavpn.com/DavidP. The link is down below.